at the edge of a dry ancient lake bed, where the wind has worried the earth for thousands of years, a scatter of stones lies half buried in dust. They are not impressive at first glance. No towering temple rises behind them, no inscription waits to be translated, no king's name is carved into a wall. There is only broken ground, pale animal bone, flakes of stone sharp enough to cut skin, and a silence so old it seems less like emptiness than a kind of locked door. Somewhere in this landscape, long before cities, before farming, before gods with names, before the first written words, a human hand picked up a stone and changed it. That small act seems simple, but behind it stands one of the deepest mysteries archaeology has ever faced, not merely when humans learned to survive, but when they began to think in the strange, symbolic, restless way that makes them human. The mystery does not begin with a golden mask or a ruined palace. It begins in dust, bone, darkness, and fragments. A footprint hardened in ancient mud, a red smear of ochre on a shell, a body placed carefully into the ground, a line cut across stone with no obvious purpose, a handprint blown onto a cave wall by someone whose face is gone forever. These traces are small, but they carry a force greater than their size. They suggest that at some point in the deep past, human beings stopped merely living inside the world and began making meaning from it. They remembered, they imagined, they marked places, they carried objects that were not only useful, they returned to darkness when daylight would have served them better. They looked at death and may have seen something more than a body cooling in the earth. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, because this story moves slowly, not through the noisy drama of armies and empires, but through the quieter drama of the first minds that may have wondered what they were. The oldest human mystery is difficult because it hides inside evidence that almost never survives. A stone tool can endure for millions of years. A bone can fossilize. A cave wall can preserve pigment if the conditions are kind. But a thought leaves no fossil. A fear leaves no skeleton. A story told beside a fire disappears the moment the last listener dies, unless it is somehow transformed into marks, patterns, objects, rituals, or repeated behavior. Archaeologists are forced to work backward from what remains, and what remains is painfully incomplete. The evidence suggests, it hints, it gestures, but it rarely speaks plainly. No single explanation fully accounts for the long, uneven path between an animal using tools and a human painting animals in the dark. Imagine standing in a prehistoric shelter at dusk. Outside, the land is colder than the present, or greener than the present, depending on the century into which the imagination falls. Herds pass in the distance. Smoke hangs low from a small fire. Children sleep close to adults. A stone blade is being retouched by careful pressure. Somewhere nearby, a piece of red mineral has been ground into powder. It might be used to colour skin, or treat hide, or mark an object, or signal belonging. Scholars still debate such traces because the same material can serve many purposes. Ochre can be practical, it can also be beautiful, it can preserve leather, repel insects, decorate bodies, mark identity, or carry meanings that are no longer recoverable. The object survives, the reason may not. That is the difficulty at the heart of the mystery. Early humans did not leave explanations beside their artifacts. They left the artifacts alone, stripped of voice. A pierced shell may be a bead, a charm, a token, a sign of status, or simply a useful object whose context has vanished. A deliberate burial may suggest care for the dead, but care does not automatically reveal belief in an afterlife. A handprint in a cave may be a signature, a ritual act, a teaching mark, a game, or something entirely outside modern categories. The evidence remains incomplete, and the more ancient it becomes, the more careful every claim must be. Yet something happened. Across immense stretches of time, human behaviour slowly deepened. The oldest stone tools show planning, but later tools show more refined intention. Campsites show repeated use of landscapes. Fire changes food, danger, sleep, and social life. Pigments appear. Objects travel across distances. Burials become more difficult to dismiss as accidental. Cave art appears in places where making it required effort, light, memory, and perhaps ceremony. None of this emerges all at once everywhere. The old idea of a sudden mental explosion is too simple. What survives in the record suggests a long, uneven awakening, scattered across regions, interrupted by climate, migration, extinction, and loss. This is why the oldest human mystery is not one object, one cave, or one vanished tribe. It is the question of when the human mind crossed an invisible threshold. At what point did a toolmaker become a storyteller? At what point did a hunter see an animal not only as meat and danger, but as image, spirit, memory, or symbol? At what point did the dead become ancestors? At what point did a mark become a message? These questions are difficult not because there is no evidence, but because the evidence is both powerful and ambiguous. It is enough to disturb certainty, but not enough to close the case. The landscape itself has hidden much of the answer. Ancient coastlines, where many early humans likely lived, now lie beneath the sea. Caves have collapsed, rivers have moved, bones have dissolved in acidic soils, fireplaces have been scattered by animals, roots, floods, and time. Entire worlds where people walked, hunted, loved, feared, and buried their dead have disappeared without leaving more than a few durable traces. Archaeology is therefore not a complete archive. It is a damaged memory. It preserves some things by accident and destroys others without mercy. Still, the fragments refuse to be meaningless. They gather like clues around a shape that cannot quite be seen. In Africa, early signs of complex behaviour appear deep in time. In Europe, painted caves offer astonishing visions of animals and symbols. In Asia and island worlds, discoveries continue to complicate old assumptions about where innovation began. Neanderthals and Denisovans, once pushed into the background of human history, now stand closer to the mystery, forcing a harder question. Was symbolic thought the private inheritance of Homo sapiens? Or did several kinds of humans share parts of this inner world? Scholars still debate the answer, and every new discovery seems to make the story richer rather than simpler. So the investigation begins not with certainty, but with humility. The first answer is not waiting in a single cave chamber. It is scattered across continents, buried in stone flakes, pigments, bones, footprints, hearths, and silence. To follow it is to move through a world where humans are both familiar and unreachable. Their hands look like ours. Their tools fit the palm. Their fires warm the dark. Yet their thoughts remain behind a veil. The mystery is ancient because it reaches back before writing, before memory, before tradition could explain itself. And it is human because, in searching for the first signs of meaning, we are really searching for the moment when the past begins to look back. The ground rarely gives up a whole story. It gives up a tooth without a face, a blade without a hand, a hearth without a voice, a skull fragment that once held a mind and now holds only mineral. Archaeology, at this depth of time, is less like reading a book than walking through the scene of an event after nearly every witness has vanished and most of the room has burned down. The oldest human mystery has to be approached as a deep-time crime scene, where the clues are real but scattered, where absence may be as important as presence, and silence must not be filled too quickly, The first difficulty is that the human past was never preserved evenly. Some landscapes are generous: dry caves, volcanic ash layers, alkaline lake margins, frozen ground, and sealed sediments can protect traces for astonishing spans of time. Other landscapes erase almost everything: tropical forests, acidic soils, shifting river plains, exposed coastlines, and places repeatedly trampled by animals or people can swallow lives without leaving more than a stain. The map of discovery is not the same as the map of ancient life. A region rich in fossils may simply be where fossils survived. A region poor in evidence may once have been crowded with movement, firelight, and memory. What survives in the record suggests patterns, but the record itself is broken from the beginning. This brokenness matters because early humans did not live only in the places archaeologists can now study easily. They followed water, animals, stone sources, seasons, coastlines, and shelter. Many of the most attractive places for human life were river mouths and shorelines, especially when the sea was lower and continental shelves stretched outward as broad plains. Today, many of those plains are drowned. Campsites with tools, fish bones, hearths, pigments, and graves may now lie beneath waves and silt. The evidence remains incomplete not only because time passed, but because the land itself moved in and out of reach. Then there is the problem of time's violence. Bone is not guaranteed to become fossil. Wood rots, fibre disappears, skin, baskets, clothing, nets, ropes, and carved sticks are usually lost unless preserved by rare conditions. Yet these perishable things may have been central to ancient life. A community could possess complex language, painted bodies, wooden tools, and seasonal ceremonies, while leaving behind little more than stone chips and burned bone. The oldest people appear, in the surviving record, more stone-bound than they likely were. The durable debris remains, and modern eyes can mistake it for the whole. Even stone, for all its endurance, can mislead. A flake may be produced by a skilled hand, but stones can also fracture naturally under pressure, heat, trampling, or geological movement. Archaeologists examine angles, scars, striking platforms, repeated patterns, raw material choices, and wider context before deciding whether a stone was shaped deliberately. A single sharp edge is not enough. Repeated patterns found with bones or a living surface say more. But caution follows every step. Scholars still debate certain early sites because the line between nature's accident and human intention can be thin when the evidence is extremely old. The same caution applies to bones. Cut marks may reveal butchery, yet trampling, carnivore teeth, sediment pressure, and excavation damage can imitate or obscure human action. Burned bone may come from cooking, disposal, wildfire, or later disturbance. A body found in a pit may be a burial, but it may also have fallen into a natural hollow, been dragged by animals, or been moved by water. To call something ritual is especially difficult, because ritual is an interpretation of meaning. Not merely an observation of arrangement, archaeologists can describe a body's position, a grave's shape, pigments, objects, and sediment. Meaning has to be inferred, and inference must remain open to revision. Every claim rests on layers: the object, the context, the dating, the comparison, and the interpretation. Dating itself is a discipline of patience and limits. Radiocarbon can reach only so far back, and beyond that archaeologists rely on uranium decay, trapped electrons, volcanic layers, magnetic reversals, or the last time grains of sediment saw sunlight. Each method has weaknesses and margins of error. A date is not a magic number pulled from the earth. It is an argument built from chemistry, geology, and context. And yet, Despite all this caution, the fragments do form a pattern. Across Africa, some of the oldest evidence of the genus Homo appears beside stone tools and butchered animal remains, suggesting changing diets, widening movement, and increasingly deliberate engagement with the environment. In Eurasia, later traces show humans adapting to climates and landscapes that demanded memory and cooperation, on islands and across difficult barriers. Discoveries reveal that ancient humans were sometimes more capable of movement than older models assumed. These are signs of minds reading landscapes, sharing knowledge, and surviving through learned behavior. The crime scene is therefore not still, it shifts as discoveries emerge. A cave once thought empty may contain microscopic residue. A shell once ignored may reveal deliberate perforation. A dark stain may become a hearth after careful analysis. Sediment itself can preserve traces of people who left no bones, through proteins, pollen, charcoal, tools, or genetic material embedded in the floor of a cave. The past is no longer studied only by brushing dirt from visible objects. It is read in molecules, residues, wear marks, isotopes, and landscapes. But the central mystery survives every new technique. Archaeologists can often show that someone was there, what they ate, what stone they chose, how far they travelled, and sometimes whether they returned to the same place again and again. They can sometimes show care, planning, teaching, and adaptation. What they cannot easily show is the inner weather of the mind. Did a group gather at a place because it was useful, sacred, familiar, or all three at once? Did a red mark mean ownership, beauty, protection, adulthood, mourning, or nothing that modern language can hold? No single explanation fully accounts for the traces. So the investigation begins with patience. The Earth is not hiding one neat answer. It is preserving a damaged constellation of clues. The oldest human mystery sits between what can be measured and what can only be approached. It asks us to look at a stone flake and see not only an edge, but a decision. To look at a hearth and see not only ash, but a circle of bodies in the dark. The deep time crime scene does not solve itself. It invites us closer, then reminds us how much of the first human world has already vanished. The first voice of the human mind is not a word, it is an edge. Long before a painted animal appears on a cave wall, long before a body is lowered into the ground with care, long before pigment is ground into powder and carried across a landscape, stone begins to change under the pressure of intention. A hand lifts one rock and strikes it against another. A flake breaks away. The edge is sharp, brighter than the weathered surface around it, and suddenly the world is different. Hide can be cut. Tendons can be severed. Meat can be stripped from bone. Wood can be shaped. Plants can be processed. A dead animal is no longer only a carcass guarded by teeth and claws. It becomes a store of food, skin, sinew, marrow, possibility. At first glance, stone tools seem like practical things, and in one sense they are. Their usefulness is obvious. But usefulness alone does not explain why they matter so deeply to the oldest human mystery. A stone tool is not only an object, it is a record of sequence. It preserves a chain of choices made by someone who understood force, angle, material, and outcome. The maker had to see not only the stone as it was, but the stone as it might become. That small gap between present form and imagined result is one of the most important spaces in human history. The earliest widely accepted stone tool traditions are simple compared with later blades and spear points, but simple does not mean mindless. Even a basic flake tool requires selecting the right raw material, holding it correctly, striking it with enough force, and recognizing the useful edge once it appears. Many animals use objects, and some use them with surprising skill, but the human stone record grows into something different repeated forms, learned techniques, transported materials, and eventually traditions that can be passed across generations. What survives in the record suggests not just clever hands, but social learning. This is where stone begins to speak quietly. A tool can reveal that knowledge did not live only in one individual. It moved, it was copied, it was corrected. A young maker may have watched an older one strike a core, fail, adjust, and strike again. The lesson may have been shown with gestures, sounds, or speech too ancient to recover. Archaeologists cannot hear that teaching, but they can see its shadow in repeated patterns. When flakes are removed in consistent ways across a site, when similar techniques appear again and again, there is memory in the debris. The older one tools, associated with some of the earliest members of the human lineage and their relatives, are often described as crude, but that word can mislead. They are crude only compared with later human artistry. In their own world, they were a revolution. A sharp flake could open an animal carcass before scavengers fully claimed it. A hammerstone could crack bones and expose marrow rich in fat. In a landscape where survival could depend on timing, cooperation, and quick access to calories, this mattered. Early toolmaking may have changed diets, bodies, movement, and social behavior. Scholars still debate the exact relationship between tools, meat-eating, brain expansion, and cooperation, but no single explanation fully accounts for the long entanglement between them. Then, much later, the Herculean hand axe appears and the mystery deepens. These teardrop-shaped tools, made across huge regions and immense spans of time, are among the most iconic objects in prehistory. Some are rough working tools, clearly made for cutting and butchery. Others are so symmetrical, so carefully shaped, that they seem to carry something beyond immediate utility. They fit the hand, but they also fit the eye. A well-made hand axe requires planning across many strikes. The maker must maintain balance, thin the stone, correct mistakes, and hold a form in mind that does not yet exist. The finished object becomes a kind of fossilized intention. There is a lesser-known strangeness in some of these hand axes. A few appear too large, too finely made, or too unused to be easily explained as everyday tools. Some were made from strikingly beautiful stone. Some preserve fossils or unusual colors within the material, as if the maker noticed the stone's appearance as well as its function. This does not prove art, ritual, or status display, but it complicates the old picture of early humans as purely practical creatures. The evidence remains incomplete, yet the objects hint that beauty and skill may have begun to matter long before painting and sculpture. Still, caution is necessary. It is tempting to look at a symmetrical hand axe and see a mind already like ours, admiring form for its own sake. But symmetry can also improve function. Skill can be practical. A large tool might be a teaching object, a display of ability, a stored resource, or simply the result of local stone and habit. Archaeology can show the object and its context. It cannot easily recover the maker's pride, indifference, or intention. The oldest mystery refuses easy answers because the same artifact can support several careful interpretations. What is clearer is that toolmaking gradually demanded more from the mind. Later technologies require prepared cores, where the maker shapes a stone in advance so that a desired flake can be removed at the right moment. This is not random breaking. It is delayed reward, structured action, and mental rehearsal. The useful piece is hidden inside the stone before it exists. To make it, the maker must think ahead, remember steps, and understand how one action prepares another. Such behavior suggests a mind increasingly capable of planning beyond the immediate second. Tools also tied humans to landscapes. Good stone was not everywhere. Groups learned where to find flint, chert, quartzite, obsidian, or other workable materials. Sometimes stone travelled far from its source, carried by people or passed between groups. A tool found far from the place where its raw material originated may suggest movement, exchange, seasonal routes, or social contact. Each possibility opens another door. A stone flake may reveal not only a hand, but a journey. And yet stone alone cannot solve the mystery. A tool can show intelligence without revealing symbolic thought. It can show planning without proving myth. It can show teaching without confirming language as modern humans know it. The path from sharp edge to painted cave is not a straight line. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans and human relatives made tools, hunted, gathered, butchered, migrated, adapted, and survived with remarkable skill. But the signs of symbolic behavior remain patchy, uneven, and difficult to interpret. Technology rises before clear evidence of art becomes widespread. Bodies become more human before culture becomes unmistakably rich. The gap is not empty, but it is shadowed. So the stone tools stand at the beginning of the investigation like the first readable marks in a language still missing most of its grammar. They tell us that early humans were not passive animals waiting for civilization to happen. They were makers, learners, and problem solvers. Their hands understood the hidden potential inside matter. Their minds could link memory to action. But whether those same hands already carried stories, spirits, names, and meanings remains harder to know. The edge cuts clearly. The thought behind it stays partly hidden. A skull can survive where a song cannot. It can rest in sediment for tens of thousands of years, lose its flesh, lose its eyes, lose every memory it once carried, and still keep the shape of a face close enough to trouble the living. In the long investigation of human origins, skulls seem at first to offer firmer answers than pigments or cave walls. Bone has measurements. Brow ridges can be compared. Teeth can be studied. The curve of a forehead. The roundness of a brain case. The shape of a chin. The size of the face. The base of the skull. The inner ear. The jaw. The pelvis. The hands. All of these become evidence. They tell us when bodies began to look like ours, but they do not tell us, with the same clarity, when minds began to work like ours. This is the strange gap at the heart of the oldest human mystery. Anatomically, modern humans appear deep in the African past, with fossils showing faces, skull shapes, and body forms increasingly close to living people long before the full richness of later symbolic culture becomes common in the archaeological record. The body arrives before the unmistakable flood of art, ritual, ornament, complex tools, long-distance exchange, and dense symbolic behavior appears everywhere. That does not mean early Homo sapiens lacked imagination. It means the evidence remains incomplete, uneven, and difficult to read. The bones become modern before the surviving traces of the mind become undeniable. The skull, by itself, tempts the viewer toward a simple answer. A rounded brain case seems to promise a modern mind. A lighter face seems to announce a new kind of human. A chin, that oddly human feature, seems almost like a signature. But evolution does not work like a switch thrown in darkness. Traits appear gradually, in different combinations, across populations spread over vast landscapes. Some ancient people look strikingly modern in one feature and archaic in another. Some fossils blur categories. Human history is not a neat ladder rising toward the present. It is a braided river, splitting, merging, drying, and reappearing in unexpected places. Inside those skulls were brains broadly within the human range, but brain size alone is not the answer. Neanderthals, for example, often had brains as large as or larger than those of living humans, yet their skulls and bodies followed a different evolutionary path. The question is not only how much brain tissue existed, but how it was organized, how it developed, how people learned from one another, and how social life shaped thought. A brain does not become human in isolation. It grows inside a body, inside a childhood, inside a group, inside a landscape of danger and memory. No single explanation fully accounts for the relationship between anatomy, cognition, and culture. One of the more surprising details is that childhood may be part of the mystery. Human children remain dependent for an unusually long time. This long childhood is costly. It demands care, food sharing, patience, and social tolerance. But it also creates a long period for learning. A child can watch toolmaking, follow tracks, learn plants, absorb gestures, sounds, rules, and stories. The extended human childhood may have helped make culture deeper and more stable, because knowledge could accumulate slowly inside young minds before they had to survive alone. What survives in the record suggests that learning was not a side effect of humanity. It may have been one of its engines. Yet even here, the evidence is indirect. A fossil child does not reveal the lessons it learned. A juvenile skull does not preserve the voice that corrected it beside a fire. Archaeologists can study growth patterns in teeth and bones. They can compare development across species. They can infer that long dependency would require social structures strong enough to support it. But the emotional and symbolic world of those groups remains partly veiled. Did early human children learn origin stories? Did they know names for the dead? Did they fear certain places? Did they paint, sing, imitate animals, or carry small objects because adults had taught them meaning? The questions are powerful, but the answers dissolve quickly. The gap between body and culture once encouraged the idea of a sudden creative explosion, especially associated with a later Ice Age Europe, where cave paintings, carved figures, ornaments, and elaborate tools appear with extraordinary force. In that older picture, humans were anatomically ready for a long time. Then something changed sharply. Perhaps language, brain wiring, or social organization, and symbolic culture burst into view. The image is dramatic, but too clean. Newer discoveries complicate it. Earlier African sites show pigments, engraved materials, shell beads, careful technologies, and long-distance movement before the famous painted caves of Europe. The awakening, if that is the right word, was not a single sunrise. It was more like fire appearing in scattered places across a dark plain. Still, the puzzle remains. Why does the archaeological record seem quiet for so long? One possible answer is preservation. Early symbolic life may have used materials that vanished: wood, fibre, feathers, skin, body paint, song, dance, and spoken story. A community could have been rich in meaning while leaving behind no painted cave and no carved bone. Another answer is population. Small, scattered groups may invent behaviours that disappear when the group dies, moves, or fails to pass them on. Culture needs not only imagination, but continuity. A symbol that is not shared, repeated, and remembered can vanish in one generation. Population size may therefore matter as much as intelligence. A lone genius in the deep past leaves little if there is no network to preserve the idea. Larger connected groups can maintain skills, refine them, and pass them outward. When groups are isolated or reduced by harsh climates, cultural traditions may shrink or disappear. Scholars still debate how much demographic pressure shaped the rise of symbolic behaviour, but it offers an important reminder. The human mind may have needed a human world around it before its traces became archaeologically visible. This makes the mystery inside the skull even stranger. The capacity for meaning may have existed before. Meaning became durable in the record. Early humans may have carried minds full of memory, fear, affection, identity, and imagination, while the earth preserved only their bones and tools. The absence of art in one period does not prove the absence of thought. But archaeology must resist giving vanished people more certainty than the evidence allows. Between denial and fantasy lies the careful middle ground something was developing, but its earliest forms are difficult to catch. So the skulls stare back with a quiet challenge. They tell us that people like us once moved through worlds that were not yet filled with monuments, writing, cities, or fields. Their faces may have shown grief, amusement, concentration, suspicion, tenderness, and hunger. Their hands made tools. Their bodies endured cold, heat, childbirth, injury, and age. But the inner threshold remains hidden. At what point did a mind inside such a skull begin to bind the world with invisible threads of meaning? At what point did memory become tradition, sound become story, death become ritual, and a mark become more than a mark bone brings us close? It does not let us enter. Long before a wall is painted with running horses or a carved figure is held in the hand, there is red dust on stone. It stains the fingers, it gathers in cracks, it clings to shell, bone, skin, and hide. In many prehistoric sites, red ochre appears like a quiet signal from a mind that has begun to notice colour, not only as part of the world, but as something that can be chosen, carried, ground, mixed, and applied. The material itself is simple iron-rich mineral earth, often hematite, which can be scraped or crushed into powder, but its presence in the human record is anything but simple. It may be practical, it may be symbolic, it may be both at once, and because it sits exactly on the border between use and meaning, ochre becomes one of the most difficult clues in the oldest human mystery. A person searching for ochre in the deep past does not merely pick up any red stone by accident. Good pigment has to be recognized. It has to be collected from a source, sometimes transported, sometimes processed with grinding stones or shells, sometimes mixed with fat, water, plant gum, or other substances. In some places, pieces of ochre show scraping, scoring, and repeated use. In others, the pigment appears on objects that seem to have been worn, stored, or displayed. This does not automatically prove ritual, but it does reveal attention. Early humans were not only responding to immediate hunger and danger, they are altering surfaces, changing appearances, and perhaps making visible things that could otherwise only be known within a group. The colour red itself carries a dangerous temptation for interpretation. Modern observers see blood, fire, birth, death, warning, beauty, and sacred power. It is easy to imagine early humans seeing the same things. But archaeology must be careful. The meaning of red is not universal in one simple way, and the evidence remains incomplete. Ochre can be used to tan hides, protect skin from sun or insects, preserve materials, help haft tools, or mark objects for practical reasons. A pigment stain does not always equal a symbol. Yet if a material has practical uses, that does not exclude symbolic ones. Human behaviour often refuses such clean divisions. A decorated body can be beautiful, protective, social, and spiritual at the same time. This is why ochre is so important. It forces the investigation away from either-or thinking. A sharpened stone blade has obvious function. A painted hand on a wall seems more openly symbolic. Ochre sits between them. It may have begun in usefulness and grown into meaning, or its usefulness and meaning may have existed together from the start. A person could rub ochre onto skin to protect it, and also to signal adulthood, mourning, courage, kinship, or belonging. A group could mark hides for practical treatment and still recognize colour as powerful. Scholars still debate such possibilities because the substance survives, while the gestures around it vanish. In some southern African sites, ancient ochre use appears with other signs of complex behaviour, including engraved pieces, carefully made tools, and evidence that people selected and processed materials with considerable skill. At Blombos Cave, for instance, Engraved ochre pieces and a kind of pigment processing toolkit have often been discussed as key evidence in debates about early symbolism. The marks are deliberate, but what they meant is not known. They may represent pattern making, ownership, counting, identity, teaching, decoration, or something outside modern categories. What survives in the record suggests intention, but intention is not the same as translation. That distinction matters. A crosshatched design on ochre may feel immediately meaningful to a modern eye because it looks organized. It resists being dismissed as random, but organized marks do not tell us their own language. They may be signs without words, experiments in pattern, memory aids, group symbols, or the earliest remains of a visual tradition that is otherwise lost. The oldest human mystery grows sharper here. Humans may have been making marks long before they made messages that can be read. The mark announces that a mind has acted, but it does not reveal the mind's full content. Shell beads deepen the problem. A pierced shell found far from the shore is a tiny object, but it can carry enormous implications. If it was deliberately perforated and worn, it suggests display. If several similar shells are found together, stained with pigment or worn smooth by contact with skin or fibre, the case becomes stronger. Beads are not tools in the ordinary sense. They do not cut meat or scrape hides. They work socially. They show something to someone. They may say who a person is, which group they belong to, what status they hold, what exchange network they enter, or what memory they carry. Yet again, the exact meaning is lost. A bead is evidence of communication, but not of the message itself. There is something quietly astonishing about this. To wear a bead, a person must understand that others can see and interpret it. The object becomes part of a social surface. It turns the body into a place where information appears. This suggests a world in which identity is not only lived but displayed. It may point toward alliances, kinship, mating signals, ritual roles, or simply shared taste. No single explanation fully accounts for the spread and variation of ancient ornaments, but their existence reveals that early humans were increasingly concerned with how they appeared to one another. Some of the most revealing traces are not grand artworks, but tiny residues, pigment trapped in shell holes, polish along bead edges, microscopic wear from string, fragments of mineral ground on stone slabs. These details show that symbolism, if that is what it was, did not always begin as spectacle. It may have begun close to the body, in small objects touched every day. A person walking across a Pleistocene landscape with shells around the neck or pigment on the skin carried meaning in motion. Unlike cave art, which remains fixed in darkness, ornaments travel. They turn the human body into a moving sign. Still, uncertainty must remain in the narration because ancient appearance is almost completely lost. Clothing, hair, painted skin, feathers, scars, woven cords, wooden pendants, and plant ornaments rarely survive. The few beads and pigments archaeologists recover may be only the durable remains of a much richer visual world. Early humans may have been far more decorated, colourful, and symbolically expressive than the record allows us to see. Or symbolism may have appeared irregularly, flaring in some communities and fading in others. The evidence allows both richness and caution. Ochre also reminds us that meaning may not have begun in temples or myths, but in touch. A hand grinding pigment feels resistance. Powder gathers under fingernails. Colour changes the surface of skin, shell, hide, or stone. The world becomes alterable in a new way. To mark something is to say, in the most basic form, that the object is not only found but transformed. That transformation may be practical, but it also opens a door. Once a surface can carry colour, it can carry memory. Once a body can be marked, it can carry identity. Once a pattern can be repeated, it can belong to a group. So the red traces remain among the most haunting clues in the deep record. They do not shout, they stain. They linger in powder and scratches, in shells pierced by patient hands, in stones rubbed smooth by repeated use. They show a creature increasingly unwilling to leave the world as it was found. Somewhere in that red dust lies a threshold, not clean enough to mark with a single date, not loud enough to solve the mystery, but impossible to ignore. The first humans who used ochre may have been treating hides, protecting skin, decorating bodies, honouring the dead, claiming identity, or doing several of these things at once. The earth keeps the colour, it withholds the meaning. The ground remembers footsteps more rarely than it remembers stone. A tool can fall, be buried, and wait for 1,000,000 years with its edge still visible under dust. A footprint is more fragile. It begins as a pressure in mud, ash, damp sand, or soft lake clay, and most of the time it vanishes within hours. Wind fills it, rain softens it, animals trample it. The sun dries and cracks it until the shape disappears. For a footprint to survive, the earth must perform a small miracle. The surface must be soft enough to receive the body, then quickly sealed, hardened, covered, and protected from the ordinary violence of time. When that happens, the result is intimate in a way bones and tools are not. A footprint does not show only that someone lived. It shows a person passing through a moment. Across ancient landscapes, these rare tracks pull the mystery of human origins out of the cave and into open country. They place bodies in motion. They show direction, stride, weight, speed, sometimes even age and group movement. A trail of prints can suggest adults walking with children, individuals slipping slightly in wet sediment, people moving together across a lake margin or volcanic ash field. The evidence remains incomplete, and interpretations must be careful. But footprints offer something unusually direct. They are not objects made for future eyes. They are accidents of presence. At Letoli in East Africa, far older than Homo sapiens, fossil footprints preserve upright walking in volcanic ash. Their makers were not modern humans, yet the tracks matter because they reveal a body already committed to walking on two legs. The prints cross a landscape once touched by ashfall, rain, and passing animals. They are not symbolic. They do not reveal myth or ritual. But they show one of the deep foundations on which later human life would depend. Hands freed from constant locomotion, eyes lifted across distance, bodies able to travel, carry, gather, and return. The oldest human mystery is not solved by walking, but walking creates the stage on which memory and culture can expand. Much later, footprints associated with Homo sapiens and other humans reveal lives lived across unstable worlds. Ancient people moved along lake shores that no longer exist, crossed river plains now buried under sediment, and followed coasts now drowned beneath the sea. During glacial periods, sea levels fell dramatically, exposing vast lands that are gone today. What is now seabed was once plain, marsh, river valley, hunting ground, and perhaps home. The loss is enormous. Some of the routes early humans used may be invisible not because they were unimportant, but because the ocean has covered them. What survives in the record suggests movement, but the full map of that movement has been torn. Footprints also remind us that migration was not a clean arrow drawn across a map. It was hunger, weather, memory, fear, and opportunity. A group does not simply leave Africa or enter Europe as if crossing a line in a book. People follow water, they wait out dry seasons, they return to known stone sources, they avoid predators, floods, hostile groups, or empty country. They move when animals move. They learn the moods of rivers and the timing of plants. They carry children. They lose the old and bury, abandon, or mourn them according to customs we cannot fully see. Scholars still debate the roots, dates, and waves of early dispersals, but the human reality behind them must have been slow, local, and deeply practical. At ancient campsites, the traces of movement become more layered. A hearth shows that people stopped. A scatter of stone flakes shows that tools were repaired or made there. Animal bones may reveal hunting, scavenging, cooking, or sharing. Pollen and plant remains can suggest season. Burned seeds, shellfish, fish bones, or grinding stones widen the diet beyond the dramatic image of the spear and mammoth. One lesser-known truth of prehistory is that much survival depended on small, repetitive knowledge which roots are safe, when shellfish are easiest to gather, where birds nest, how marrow can be extracted, when a dry valley will flood, which distant hill holds good stone. Heroic hunting is only part of the story. Endurance often lives in details. These details matter because they suggest the growth of shared mental maps. A landscape is not only a physical place to people who return to it across generations, it becomes a storehouse of memory. A ridge may mean good flint, a spring may mean safety, a bend in a river may mean danger, a cave may mean shelter, ancestors, animals, darkness, or taboo. Even without writing, landscapes can hold stories. What survives archaeologically may be only a repeated campsite or a path of stone tools. But behind repetition there may be remembered roots, seasonal expectations, and inherited knowledge. No single explanation fully accounts for how practical geography becomes cultural geography, but human beings seem especially gifted at turning place into meaning. Climate makes this story even more unstable. The world of early humans was not the settled map we know. Deserts expanded and retreated, grasslands shifted, forests opened and closed, ice sheets locked away water and then released it. Lakes appeared in basins that are dry today, then vanished. The Sahara, often imagined as eternal sand, has passed through greener phases when rivers, wetlands, animals, and human groups move through regions now harsh and empty. Such changing landscapes may have opened corridors in one age and closed them in another. Human movement was shaped by windows of possibility, and when those windows closed, groups may have been isolated, forced to adapt, or erased. In such worlds, cooperation becomes more than kindness. It becomes technology. A person alone may know a valley. A group can remember a region. Across generations, knowledge can stretch beyond any single lifetime. Where to find water after drought? Which animals return after rain? Which shells can be gathered at low tide? Which mountain pass is dangerous after snow? These are not merely facts, they are survival memory. Language would have made such memory more powerful. But even before language can be fully proven, the archaeological record shows behaviour that depends on learning from others. Tracks, hearths, tools, and travelled materials all point toward lives woven together. Still, the footprints themselves remain silent about meaning. A trail of ancient children crossing mud does not tell us whether they were playing, fleeing, gathering, or following adults. A group moving across a lakeshore does not reveal whether they sang, feared spirits, watched birds, or simply looked for food. The evidence remains incomplete, but it places humanity in motion before monuments, before fields, before nations, before any written memory of journeys. It shows that the first long story humans told with their bodies was movement across a changing earth. And perhaps that movement helped create the inner world archaeology struggles to recover. To travel is to compare places, to return is to remember, to cross danger is to teach, to lose a landscape beneath drought, ice, or rising sea is to carry absence in the mind. Before people write history, they may already live inside remembered geography. A footprint hardened in mud is only a passing mark, but it hints at something larger, humans becoming creatures of roots, seasons, stories, and return. The track fades into the distance, and beyond it lie the vanished worlds where meaning may have learned to walk. The dead are among the most difficult witnesses in prehistory, because a body can be found in the ground for many reasons. A person may be buried with care. A person may fall into a hollow and be covered by sediment. A flood may carry bones into a cave. Carnivores may drag remains into darkness. Later movement of soil, roots, water, and animals may rearrange what once seemed deliberate. Yet when archaeologists find a body placed in a particular position, protected by sediment, sometimes associated with tools, pigment, flowers, animal remains, or other objects, the silence around it changes. The question becomes heavier. Was this only disposal? Or was it the beginning of grief taking form? Death must have been familiar to early humans in a way modern life often conceals. Bodies did not vanish into hospitals, institutions, or distant funeral systems. They remained close. A child who died in a shelter would be seen by everyone. An injured hunter might weaken over days. An elder might grow slower, thinner, more dependent. Then one morning no longer breathe beside the fire. Predators, weather, disease, childbirth, cold, hunger, accidents, and violence all made death part of the daily horizon. But familiarity does not make death simple. Even animals respond to the dead with behaviors that can look like distress, attention, or reluctance to leave. For humans, with memory deepening and social bonds widening, the dead may have become something more than a practical problem. A burial is never just a hole in the ground. Even the simplest deliberate burial requires choices. The body must be moved or arranged. A place must be selected. Time and energy must be spent on someone who no longer contributes to food gathering, defense, tool-making, or childcare. The act may protect the living from smell and predators, but it may also protect the body itself. It may keep the dead close, or mark a place, or transform grief into action. What survives in the record suggests care in some cases, but care does not automatically prove belief in an afterlife. That is where the mystery becomes delicate. Some ancient burials of Homo sapiens are difficult to dismiss as accidental. Bodies appear flexed, as if placed carefully. Children are sometimes found with ornaments, ochre, or objects that seem more personal than practical. In certain sites, pigment appears around the dead. Though scholars still debate whether it was sprinkled during burial, transferred from clothing or body decoration, or entered the grave through other processes. A few graves seem to show repeated use of a place, suggesting memory tied to landscape. Yet each site must be judged on its own evidence. The temptation is to see modern funeral emotion everywhere. The danger is to strip ancient people of feeling simply because their feelings cannot be excavated. Neanderthal burials sharpen the question further. For a long time, the idea that Neanderthals buried their dead was one of the most debated subjects in human origins. Some finds appear to show deliberate placement of bodies in pits or protected areas. Others are more ambiguous, complicated by old excavation methods, disturbed sediments, or later reinterpretation. Popular stories have sometimes gone too far, especially claims about flower burials based on pollen evidence that may have other explanations, including animal activity. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is increasingly difficult to portray Neanderthals as indifferent creatures who simply left their dead wherever they fell. In some places, at least, their treatment of bodies suggests attention and perhaps memory. This matters because burial is not only about the dead, it is about the living group that remains. A grave can become a fixed point in a mobile world. People who follow animals and seasons may still return to a shelter where someone lies beneath the floor or near the wall. The place changes because the dead are there. A cave is no longer only stone and shelter. A landscape is no longer only water, flint, and game. It holds absence. It holds a relationship that cannot continue in the ordinary way, yet is not entirely released. No single explanation fully accounts for why some bodies were buried and others were not, but the variation itself is revealing. Death was not handled in one universal prehistoric way. Children's burials are especially haunting because they undermine purely practical explanations. A child's body may be placed with beads, shells, ochre, or animal parts, even though the child had not yet lived long enough to earn status in the way adults might. Such graves suggest that identity could be given by kinship, affection, group belonging, or imagined future, not only by achievement, but even here caution is needed. Objects in a grave may have belonged to clothing, wrappings, offerings, or the burial environment. The meaning of a shell near a child's skull cannot be read like a sentence. Still, the emotional force is hard to ignore. Someone spent time with that loss. There is also a surprising practical detail: burying a body changes what can survive. A deliberate grave may preserve a skeleton better than exposure on the surface. That means the archaeological record may overrepresent certain kinds of death treatment and erase others. A group that placed bodies on platforms, left them in trees, cremated them, set them in water, or exposed them to animals might leave far less evidence. The absence of burial is not the absence of ritual. Many later human societies treat the dead in ways that leave little trace after thousands of years. Early humans may have done the same, and archaeology would struggle to see it. The first burial question therefore opens into a larger problem. When did humans begin to imagine the dead as socially present after biological death? Burial may indicate sanitation, protection, attachment, fear, respect, or belief. It may be several of these at once. A body placed with care does not tell us whether the living imagined a soul, an ancestor, a journey, a return, a danger, or simply a loved person who should not be abandoned. The old categories of religion, ritual, and emotion may not fit neatly into worlds before writing. What survives is action, not doctrine. Yet action can be profound. To cover a body is to refuse total exposure. To return to a burial place is to let memory settle into earth. To place pigment, tools, or ornaments with the dead is to create a relationship between the body and objects beyond immediate use. Whether this is belief in another world or a form of grief without theology, it shows that death had become something humans worked upon. They did not merely endure it, they shaped it. And so, among all the fragments of early humanity, graves remain some of the most intimate and most uncertain. They bring archaeologists closer to emotion than stone tools can, but never close enough to certainty. A hand axe reveals skill. A footprint reveals movement. Ochre reveals transformation. A burial reveals a pause, a gathering of attention around someone who no longer moves. The oldest human mystery deepens here because the dead may mark the first place where survival alone is not enough to explain behavior. Somewhere in the careful lowering of a body, in the red dust near bone, in the small beads beside a child, the human mind seems to turn toward absence and make something of it. The earth receives the dead, and in doing so, preserves the question of what the living believed they were giving back. The path into the painted caves is never casual. It narrows, drops, twists, and swallows daylight until the outside world becomes only a memory behind the body. A person entering such darkness in the Ice Age does not walk through a museum corridor. There are no smooth floors, no safe railings, no steady lamps, no labels explaining what the walls mean. There is stone underfoot, cold air in the lungs, the smell of damp earth, smoke from a small flame, and the growing sense that the ordinary world has been left behind. The deeper chambers are not useful places in any simple way. They are not good campsites. They're difficult to reach, hard to light, and sometimes dangerous. Yet humans return to them, carrying pigment, tools, torches, memory, and perhaps fear. On the walls, animals appear. Horses move with lifted heads. Bison curve out of stone. Lions, mammoths, rhinoceroses, deer, bears, and strange composite forms emerge where rock surfaces already bulge like muscle and bone. The artist did not simply place images anywhere. They often used the natural shape of the cave, turning cracks, hollows, and ridges into backs, horns, bellies, or flanks. In flickering light, the images may have seemed to shift as flames moved. A painted animal on a swelling wall could seem half present, not flat but emerging. This is one of the lesser-known powers of cave art. It was not made for the stable brightness in which modern photographs show it. It was made for moving fire. The darkness matters. Many painted caves contain images far beyond areas needed for shelter. Some marks appear in chambers that require crawling, climbing, or squeezing through narrow passages. The effort itself becomes part of the evidence. If all the artists wanted was decoration, the entrance would have been easier. If they wanted to teach children what animals looked like, daylight would have served better. No single explanation fully accounts for why so much effort was spent in hidden places. The caves seem to have been chosen not only as surfaces, but as environments. Their coldness, echoes, darkness, danger, and separation from daily life may have given them meaning. Hand stencils make the mystery more intimate. A hand is placed against stone. Pigment is blown around it, and when the hand is removed, its absence remains. The result is not a portrait, but it feels personal in a way many animal images do not. It preserves a human presence without a face. Some hands are large, some small. Some may belong to adults, some possibly to adolescents. Some have missing fingers or bent fingers, though scholars still debate whether these represent injury, frostbite, disease, deliberate finger folding, sign language, ritual gestures, or artistic convention. The evidence remains incomplete, and the walls do not explain themselves. But a hand stencil is almost impossible to look at without sensing a person reaching across time. There are also signs that are not animals and not hands dots, lines, grids, claviform shapes, branching forms, repeated marks, and abstract patterns. These are among the most frustrating and important traces in the caves. They suggest that Ice Age image-making may not have been only about realistic animals. There may have been a visual code, or at least repeated conventions shared across people and places. Some signs appear in different caves over long periods, as if certain shapes had meanings or uses now lost. But meaning is not the same as resemblance. A horse can be identified even if its purpose is debated. A row of dots cannot be translated. What survives in the record suggests structure, but not the key. One popular explanation sees cave art as hunting magic, images made to gain power over animals. It is easy to understand why this idea became famous. Many paintings show animals important to Ice Age life, and the hunter's world was bound to animal movement, danger, and survival. But the theory does not explain everything. Some animals painted in caves were not the main animals eaten at nearby sites. Some images appear in remote places unlikely to function as practical hunting instruction. Many signs have no obvious hunting purpose. Scholars still debate the role of hunting, but it cannot carry the whole weight of the evidence. Other explanations look toward ritual, initiation, storytelling, social memory, trance, or shamanic practice. Some researchers have suggested that flickering light, echoing chambers, sensory deprivation, rhythmic movement, and the stress of deep darkness may have altered perception. In such a setting, painted animals might not have been mere pictures. They might have been encountered. The cave could become a threshold space where the ordinary boundaries between stone, animal, human, and unseen forces felt less fixed. This interpretation is compelling, but it must be handled with care. It is not possible to prove the inner experience of people who left no texts. The cave can show that something unusual happened there. It cannot tell us exactly what it felt like. Sound adds another hidden layer. Some caves have strong echoes or unusual acoustics near painted areas. A voice, chant, footstep, or drum-like strike against stone would have behaved strangely underground, multiplying in the dark. The visual world and the sound world may have belonged together. Modern visitors often treat cave art as silent because museums and photographs make it silent. But ancient people entering these spaces may have experienced image, flame, breath, echo, and movement as one event. A painted bison seen by torchlight while sound trembled through stone would not be the same object as a still photograph in a book. The makers themselves remain mostly invisible. They were not isolated geniuses decorating walls for private pleasure in the modern sense. Cave art required knowledge of pigment, lighting, surface, access, and sometimes cooperation. Someone had to bring fuel. Someone had to hold light. Someone may have taught the forms. Traditions had to endure long enough for styles and signs to be recognized. In some caves, images were added over long periods, one generation marking near or over the work of another. The cave became an archive without writing, a place where memory accumulated in layers of pigment and smoke. And yet the caves are not the beginning of the human mind. They are a spectacular survival of it. By the time these images appear, humans have already been making tools, using pigments, moving across continents, burying some of their dead, and shaping social worlds too fragile to preserve. The painted chambers do not show the first moment of meaning. They show meaning becoming durable in stone. They are not the origin of mystery, but they are one of its clearest mirrors. Deep inside the caves, the oldest human mystery becomes almost physical. The walls carry animals that are alive and not alive, hands that are present through absence, signs that repeat without translation, and darkness chosen when daylight was available. These places suggest that early humans were not only solving the problems of hunger and weather, they were entering hidden spaces to create images where few would casually go. They were making the unseen visible, or perhaps making the visible strange enough to touch the unseen. What they believed cannot be recovered with certainty, but the caves prove that the human mind had learned to turn stone, shadow, flame, and memory into something that still holds us at the threshold, unable to enter fully, unable to look away. The darkness of the caves becomes even more unsettling when another kind of human steps into it. For a long time, the story was told as if Homo sapiens alone carried the full flame of imagination, while other human relatives stood nearby as clever but in complete shadows. Neanderthals were strong, cold-adapted, skillful, and doomed. Denisovans were almost ghosts, known from fragments of bone and traces in DNA. Other ancient humans appeared as side branches, interesting but secondary. In that older picture, symbolic thought belonged to us, and the mystery was only when our own species discovered how to turn the world into meaning. But the ground has not been kind to that simple story. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, enduring climates that could punish any weakness. They hunted large animals at close range, made tools, used fire, occupied caves and open-air sites, and survived in landscapes that shifted between forest, steppe, and frozen edge. Their bodies were different from ours: powerful limbs, broad chests, large noses, heavy brow ridges, and skulls shaped by a long separate history. Yet difference is not inferiority. Their world demanded memory, cooperation, and technical skill. To imagine them as dull brutes is not archaeology. It is an old prejudice wearing a scientific mask. The question is not whether Neanderthals were intelligent. They clearly were. The harder question is whether their intelligence entered the symbolic realm in ways comparable to Homo sapiens. Did they mark bodies? Did they make ornaments? Did they bury the dead with meaning? Did they use pigments as symbols rather than merely as tools? Did they create images? Scholars still debate these questions, because the evidence remains incomplete and sometimes fiercely contested. But the debate itself has changed. It is no longer enough to assume that symbolic behaviour must belong only to modern humans. Some Neanderthal sites contain pigments, including manganese and ochre-like materials, which may have been used for practical purposes, body marking, hide treatment, fire starting, or symbolic display. Some sites have yielded eagle talons with cut marks, suggesting that claws may have been removed and perhaps worn or collected. The idea of Neanderthals selecting bird parts for display is striking because it suggests attention to appearance and possibly identity. Yet caution follows closely. A talon does not explain itself. It may be ornament, tool, trophy, curiosity, or part of a practice we cannot classify. What survives in the record suggests deliberate action, but meaning remains beyond reach. There are also claims of Neanderthal cave markings. In some caves, simple forms or mineral formations appear to have been altered before Homo sapiens were known in the region, raising the possibility that Neanderthals entered dark spaces and left signs. Such discoveries are powerful because they challenge the idea that deep cave behaviour was uniquely modern human, but dating, context, and interpretation matter enormously. A mark must be shown to be human-made, ancient, and properly associated with Neanderthal presence before the claim can stand. No single explanation fully accounts for all the evidence, and the strongest cases still invite scrutiny. Burial brings the same uncertainty. Some Neanderthal bodies appear to have been placed or protected in ways that may indicate deliberate burial. Others are ambiguous. Old excavations sometimes removed bones without the careful recording modern archaeologists require. Sediments shift. Later activity disturbs earlier deposits. Popular stories about Neanderthal flowers, mourners, and rituals have sometimes leapt beyond the evidence. Still, the opposite mistake is also possible. Demanding impossible proof before allowing that another human species may have cared for its dead. The fairest position lies in the difficult middle. Some Neanderthal treatment of bodies appears deliberate. The beliefs behind it remain unknown. Denisovans make the mystery stranger because they are known less by appearance than by inheritance. A finger bone, a few teeth, fragments from caves, and DNA extracted from ancient remains revealed an entire human population once spread across parts of Asia. Their genetic legacy survives today in some living peoples, especially in Oceania and parts of Asia, where Denisovan ancestry contributed to the deep human story. One remarkable detail is that a Denisovan genetic variant helped some Tibetan populations adapt to high-altitude life. A vanished human group, barely visible in bone, still breathes faintly in the bodies of living people adapted to thin mountain air. But Denisovan culture is much harder to see. Without a richer fossil and artifact record clearly tied to them, their symbolic life remains largely hidden. Did they wear ornaments, tell stories, bury the dead, paint objects, or use signs they may have? But archaeology cannot safely fill the silence with imagination. The evidence remains incomplete. Their mystery is a reminder that entire human worlds can exist, mix with ours, shape our biology, and still leave almost no direct cultural voice behind. Other human relatives complicate the picture further. Homo floresiensis, the small-bodied human from the island of Flores, lived in isolation and made tools despite having a brain far smaller than that of modern humans. Homo luzonensis in the Philippines adds another strange island branch. These humans do not fit comfortably into old ladders of progress. They show that human evolution produced different experiments in body, brain, movement, and survival. Symbolic evidence from them remains scarce or absent, but absence is not always absence of capacity. It may be absence of preservation, discovery, or opportunity. The most profound complication is that Homo sapiens did not rise alone. Our ancestors met other humans. They interbred with them. Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA entered modern human populations and remains there in small but meaningful traces. The boundary between us and them is therefore not a wall but a contact zone. In the body of many living people, extinct humans are not wholly extinct. They survive as fragments of inheritance, immune responses, adaptations, and biological echoes. This does not mean their minds were identical to ours, but it does mean the story of humanity is not a single pure line. If several human lineages possessed parts of symbolic behaviour, then the oldest human mystery changes shape. Meaning may not have appeared suddenly in one species like a private miracle. It may have emerged unevenly among related humans facing similar pressures: social life, death, landscape memory, dangerous hunting, long childhoods, firelit learning, and the need to recognize one another as members of a group. Some lineages may have carried these capacities far. Others may have expressed them differently, or left fewer traces. Culture can vanish more easily than bone, and bone can vanish more easily than stone. The shadow humans force humility. They remind us that the first symbolic world may have had multiple doors. Some opened in Homo sapiens communities, some may have opened among Neanderthals, some may have opened among people whose names we do not yet know. Archaeology has recovered only torn edges of a much larger fabric. The old question, when did we become human, becomes harder and more honest. How many kinds of human were capable of meaning, and how much of their inner world disappeared when they did? In that question, the caves grow darker, the bones more eloquent, and the silence around our extinct relatives becomes not empty, but full of lost possibilities. Language is the great missing artifact. It may have been the most powerful tool early humans ever possessed, but it leaves almost nothing behind. A stone blade can survive in a layer of sediment, a shell bead can keep the polish of a vanished cord, a painted animal can cling to a cave wall through ice ages, but a spoken word dies the moment it is heard, unless another mind carries it forward. No fossil preserves the first name given to a river, the first warning shouted across a valley, the first story told to a child beside embers. Archaeology can uncover the stage on which language acted, but the voice itself is gone. This absence makes language one of the hardest parts of the oldest human mystery. Almost every major human behavior becomes easier with speech-teaching tool-making, planning hunts, warning of danger, sharing routes, naming kin, remembering seasons, negotiating alliances, explaining death, telling stories, and marking the difference between what is allowed and what is forbidden. Yet because language leaves no direct fossil, scholars must approach it through shadows. They look at anatomy, tools, genes, brain organization, symbolic objects, social complexity, and the demands of cooperation. Each clue matters, but none can speak alone. The body offers some hints. Speech depends on breath control, hearing, the tongue, lips, throat, and brain circuits capable of rapid coordination. Fossils can reveal parts of this system only indirectly. The shape of the skull base, the hyoid bone in the throat, the ear structures, and the nerve channels connected to breathing and tongue movement have all been studied. Some Neanderthal anatomy suggests they may have possessed vocal abilities closer to ours than older stereotypes allowed. But vocal ability is not the same as language. A body may be capable of producing complex sounds without using grammar, metaphor, myth, or story in the human sense. The evidence remains incomplete. and the line between sound and language is not easily drawn in bone. Genetics offers another tempting clue, especially genes associated with speech and language development in modern humans. But here too, caution is necessary. No single gene creates language. Human speech is not a switch hidden in DNA. It depends on networks of development, brain growth, social learning, anatomy, and culture. Some genetic variants connected to speech in living humans are also found in Neanderthals, which suggests that at least part of the biological foundation was shared. But what they did with that foundation remains uncertain. Scholars still debate whether Neanderthal language, if it existed, had the flexibility, range, and symbolic depth of modern human language. Tools again become indirect witnesses. More complex technologies require teaching. A simple flake can be learned by watching, but prepared core techniques, composite tools, hafting with adhesives, and multi-stage production demand sequences that are difficult to transmit by imitation alone. Someone must know what happens first, what comes next, what mistakes to avoid, and why a material is being prepared before its final purpose appears. Language would make this easier. It could turn action into instruction. It could carry knowledge beyond direct demonstration. But it is still possible for skilled teaching to involve gesture, observation, and repeated practice. Tool complexity suggests communication. It does not prove full speech by itself. The strongest argument for language may come from social life. Early humans were not solitary inventors scattered across empty land. They lived in groups, raised dependent children, shared food, watched predators, cared for the injured, learned landscapes, and sometimes encountered other human groups. Cooperation on this scale benefits from communication that can move beyond the immediate moment. It is useful to say where animals were seen yesterday, where water may be found tomorrow. Who can be trusted? Who is dangerous? Which plant made someone sick? Which cave should not be entered? And what happened to the dead? Language allows the absent to become present in the mind. It lets a group act on things not currently visible. That may be its deepest power. Language does not only label the world, it expands time. With speech, memory can become shared memory. A warning can outlive the person who first learned it. A route can be described before it is travelled. A child can inherit knowledge of places never seen. A dead person can remain socially alive in stories. A painted animal can be connected to a hunt, a season, a clan, or a being beyond the ordinary world. No single explanation fully accounts for the rise of symbolic culture, but language may be the invisible thread connecting many of its pieces. Still, language may not have appeared suddenly in its modern form. It could have developed gradually from calls, gestures, emotional sounds, shared attention, rhythmic coordination, and increasingly structured vocal signals. Some researchers emphasize gesture as an early foundation, because hands, eyes, and body movements can carry meaning before speech becomes fully elaborate. Others focus on vocal control, music-like communication, or the social demands of caring for children and maintaining group bonds. The truth may involve many paths at once. Early humans may have used rich combinations of gesture, sound, expression, rhythm, and touch, long before fully grammatical language became stable. There is also the strange possibility that language existed before it became archaeologically visible. A group could speak fluently and still leave behind only simple tools if their symbolic life was carried in memory. Body paint, song, dance, and perishable objects. Another group might leave beads and pigments, but no clear evidence of how complex its speech was. Language can be everywhere in life and nowhere in the ground. That is what makes it so maddening. It may be the key to the mystery, but the key itself has vanished. The painted caves hint at language without proving it. To create images deep underground may require shared plans, remembered forms, rules about access, teaching of techniques, and perhaps stories connected to animals and signs. A hand stencil may not need a spoken explanation, but a tradition of hand stencils across generations likely does. Abstract signs are even more suggestive, because repeated marks can function socially only if people know how to recognize them. Yet archaeologists cannot translate them. They cannot say whether a sign means a group, a season, a warning, a myth, or something not equivalent to any modern word. Burials also lean toward language. Grief can exist without speech, but burial practices that involve repeated customs, objects, pigment, or chosen places may depend on shared understandings. The dead may have been spoken about. Their names, if names existed, may have been remembered, avoided, repeated, or transformed. But again, the grave preserves the arrangement, not the words spoken above it. The earth keeps posture and pigment. It does not keep the sentence. So language stands at the center of the oldest human mystery as an invisible architecture. It may have held together the worlds of tools, roots, ornaments, caves, and graves. It may have allowed humans to become creatures of instruction, law, memory, and imagined possibility. But because it leaves no fossil, it must be inferred from the shape of everything around it. The first great human monument may not have been made of stone at all. It may have been a story, spoken in darkness, carried in breath, repeated until it became tradition, and lost before any hand learned to write it down. The idea of a sudden awakening is powerful because it gives the human story a clean shape. For a long time, it seemed as if the earth itself supported that drama. There were long ages of stone tools, bones, migration, fire, and survival, and then, almost abruptly, the record filled with painted caves, carved figures, ornaments, musical instruments, elaborate tools, and signs of a mind moving beyond immediate need. It was tempting to imagine a spark, a mental revolution. A moment when humans crossed from clever animal into symbolic being. The picture was simple, memorable, and wrong in the way many simple pictures of deep history eventually become wrong. The change did happen, but not as a single thunderclap. It was uneven, regional, fragile, and older than the most famous European caves. What looks sudden from a distance often becomes gradual when the view widens. The great painted caves of Ice Age Europe remain astonishing, but they are not the whole story, and they are not the beginning of everything. Long before those walls were filled with animals, people in Africa were using pigments, making careful tools, engraving patterns, collecting shells, and moving materials across landscapes in ways that suggest social and symbolic complexity. The human mind did not wait silently for Europe to become cold and dramatic before it began to make meaning. This matters because archaeology has often been shaped by where discoveries were made first, where caves preserved images well, where museums collected, and where scholars looked most intensely. Europe offered spectacular evidence, and spectacle can dominate imagination. A painted bison deep underground is easier to remember than a scratched piece of ochre or a tiny shell bead, but the quieter evidence may reach further back. Southern African sites, North African finds, and discoveries from the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond complicate the older narrative. What survives in the record suggests not one birthplace of symbolic life, but multiple centers of experiment and expression. Still, the pattern is not smooth. There are early traces that appear, vanish, and reappear after long silences. A site may show pigment processing, engraved objects, or ornaments. Then the next layer may seem more ordinary. A tradition may flourish in one place and leave no clear descendants. This does not mean people forgot how to think symbolically. It may mean populations moved, shrank, changed materials, altered customs, or left traces that did not preserve. It may also mean that symbolic practices were not always central to daily life in the same way. Culture can pulse, it can intensify under certain social conditions and fade when those conditions break. Population size and connection may explain part of this unevenness. A new behaviour does not survive simply because someone invents it. It must be learned, repeated, valued, and passed on. Small groups living in difficult landscapes may lose traditions if elders die, if children are too few, if contact with other groups breaks down, or if survival demands shift. Larger connected networks can preserve and refine more complex practices. A bead style, tool technique, pigment recipe, or story can travel farther when groups meet, exchange partners, trade materials, and recognize shared signs. Scholars still debate how strongly demographics shaped cultural change, but it helps explain why the archaeological record can look like scattered sparks rather than a steady flame. The old creative explosion also hides another problem. It treats modern human behaviour as if it must appear as art recognizable to modern eyes. But symbolism does not have to begin with grand images. It may begin with body paint, hair arrangement, scars, scent, feathers, songs, rhythms, gestures, taboos, and spoken stories. Almost all of these disappear. A group could have possessed a rich symbolic life and leave behind only stone tools because their meanings lived on skin, in sound, or in perishable objects. Another group could leave durable cave art because the geology happened to preserve it. The record is not only a record of what people did, it is a record of what time allowed to remain. Asia makes the story even more complex. For many years, the strongest images of early symbolic culture came from Europe, but discoveries in island Southeast Asia and other regions have shown that ancient image-making was not confined to one Western corridor. Painted animals, hand stencils, and other visual traditions in Asia demonstrate that human symbolic expression spread across a much wider world than once assumed. These finds are not merely footnotes to a European story. They suggest that wherever Homo sapiens moved, and perhaps wherever certain social conditions allowed, the capacity for image, sign, and ritual could take local form. The evidence remains incomplete, but the geography of the human imagination keeps expanding. Australia adds another kind of depth. People reach Sahul, the combined Ice Age landmass of Australia and New Guinea, tens of thousands of years ago, which implies sea crossings, planning, ecological knowledge, and adaptation to unfamiliar animals and landscapes. Later Aboriginal traditions would become among the longest continuing cultural traditions on Earth, though archaeology cannot simply project recent belief systems unchanged into the remote past. Still, the peopling of Sahul shows that early humans were not merely wandering passively along land routes. They could cross water barriers, enter strange environments, and create enduring relationships with landscape. The oldest human mystery follows them there, into places where much early evidence may be buried, weathered, or submerged. Europe, then, is not the birthplace of the human mind, but one extraordinary theatre where certain traces survived with dramatic clarity. The caves of Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira, and many others show what happens when skill, tradition, darkness, and preservation meet. They are breathtaking not because they appear from nothing, but because they reveal a mind already long in formation. By the time a horse is painted with such confidence, generations of observation, technique, a meaning must already stand behind the hand. The cave wall is not the first thought, it is the thought made durable. The suddenness dissolves further when one remembers that Homo sapiens themselves were not a single migrating wave carrying one complete cultural package. They were populations with different histories, moving through different climates, meeting different animals, sometimes encountering other humans, sometimes becoming isolated, sometimes reconnecting. Their cultural expressions would naturally differ. Some groups may have emphasized ornaments, others may have marked bodies, others may have used wood, fiber, or song, some may have entered caves, others may have treated open-air places, water sources, trees, or cliffs as meaningful, leaving far less behind. No single explanation fully accounts for this variety. The awakening of meaning may therefore resemble a long dawn broken by clouds. There are flashes of red pigment, then darkness, shell beads, then silence, engraved patterns, then ordinary tools, cave animals, then abstract signs no one can read, burials, then bodies left in ways that leave no trace. The pattern is not a failure of humanity. It is the nature of deep time. Culture is vulnerable. It lives in people before it lives in objects, and people can vanish. So the oldest human mystery grows richer by losing its clean beginning. There was no single morning when humans suddenly became themselves. There were many mornings, in many landscapes, with many groups discovering, forgetting, preserving, transforming, and sharing ways to make the world mean more than survival. The mind did not explode into being. It accumulated, flickered, endured, and sometimes disappeared. What remains is not a straight road from stone tool to civilization, but a broken trail of sparks across a very dark plain. Climate is not a background in the human story. It is one of the oldest characters in it, silent but immense, changing the rules whenever people begin to know them. For early humans, the world is never fixed for long. Rains shift, grasslands spread and retreat, forests thicken, then open, lakes swell, glitter for generations, and then shrink into salt flats. Ice gathers over northern continents and locks away the sea, then melts and sends water back across plains where people once walked. A valley that feeds a group in one century can become a corridor of dust in another. A coast that offers shellfish, fish, birds, and safe travel can disappear beneath rising water. The human mind does not awaken in a stable garden. It awakens under pressure. This pressure may have shaped imagination in ways that stone tools alone cannot explain. Survival in a changing climate demands more than strength. It demands memory, flexibility, cooperation, and the ability to think beyond the present moment. A dry season must be remembered before it arrives. A herd's route must be known before hunger becomes desperate. A plant that ripens only briefly must be recognized by sign, smell, and place. A water source hidden beyond a ridge must exist in the mind before it exists before the eyes. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the record suggests that early humans became experts not in one world, but in change itself. During parts of the Pleistocene, climate swung with a force difficult to imagine from modern stability. Cold periods expanded glaciers and lowered sea levels, exposing land bridges and coastal plains. Warmer periods melted ice and drowned those lands again. In Africa, humid phases opened green corridors through regions that are now desert, while arid phases compressed people and animals around lakes, rivers, and refuges. These cycles did not simply move scenery around. They changed the size of populations, the routes of migration, the availability of food, and the chances that groups would meet or become isolated. A climate shift could open a world, then close it. The Sahara is one of the clearest examples of this moving world. Today it's often imagined as an ancient barrier of sand, but in earlier humid periods, parts of it held lakes, rivers, grasslands, fish, crocodiles, hippos, and human communities. Then dryness returned, water vanished, roots broke, places of abundance became places of departure. Such transformations may have forced people to move, adapt, or perish. They may also have left deep memories. not necessarily in any story that can be traced, but in the habit of watching landscapes carefully, of treating water as destiny, of knowing that the earth can betray expectation. Volcanic events add another kind of disruption. A major eruption can darken skies, cool seasons, damage plant growth, and scatter ash across huge regions. The exact effects of ancient eruptions on human populations are often debated, and claims of total catastrophe must be treated carefully. No single explanation fully accounts for the survival or disappearance of groups after such events. But even smaller climatic shocks can matter when populations are already scattered. Food is uncertain, and children must be fed. Crisis does not need to destroy humanity everywhere to change the fate of one valley, one route, one tradition, one group of toolmakers whose knowledge dies with them. Population bottlenecks may be part of the story, though they're difficult to connect neatly to one cause. Genetic evidence suggests that human populations have passed through periods of reduction and expansion, but matching those patterns to exact archaeological events is challenging. A drought, eruption, disease pressure, habitat loss, or long chain of local failures may reduce groups without leaving a dramatic layer of destruction. What survives may be only a thinning of evidence, a break in tradition, or a genetic shadow. Scholars still debate the timing and causes of such bottlenecks, but the possibility itself matters. If human groups were sometimes small and fragile, then culture was fragile too. This is where climate and imagination meet. A small group under pressure cannot rely only on instinct. It needs social trust. It needs ways to share food, reduce conflict, remember obligations, and maintain bonds with distant groups. Ornaments, pigments, rituals, and stories may have helped create those bonds. A shell bead is not food, but it can signal belonging. A repeated mark is not shelter, but it can identify a group. A burial is not a hunting tool, but it can hold memory in place. Symbolic behavior may have strengthened cooperation by making invisible relationships visible. The evidence remains incomplete, but the idea's powerful meaning may have been a survival technology. Long-distance networks would have mattered, especially in uncertain environments. If one region failed, knowledge of another could save lives. If a group had allies beyond its immediate territory, exchange and marriage could keep populations connected. Materials found far from their sources suggest that people sometimes moved objects across impressive distances or passed them through networks of contact. Stone, shells, pigments, and ornaments become clues not only to travel, but to relationship. In a changing world, isolation can be dangerous. Connection allows knowledge, genes, tools, and symbols to move. There is a lesser-known cost hidden inside this process. The more complex a culture becomes, the more it depends on continuity. A simple tool can be reinvented, a detailed ritual, a specialized technique, a seasonal map, or a symbolic code may be lost if too many people die or groups scatter. Climate pressure may therefore explain both the appearance and disappearance of early cultural traces. In good times, networks widen and traditions flourish. In hard times, people simplify, move, abandon places, or lose practices that once mattered. The record's strange pattern of sparks and silences may partly reflect this rhythm. Crisis may also have deepened the need for explanation. Humans facing drought, storms, animal migrations, sudden cold, fire, flood, and death would not merely observe events. They would remember them, fear them, and perhaps turn them into stories. The first myths cannot be recovered, but the conditions that make myth useful are ancient danger, uncertainty, memory, and the need to teach the young. A story about a dangerous waterhole can preserve practical knowledge. A taboo around a cave may protect people from falling. A tale about animals may encode hunting behavior, seasonal timing, or moral rules. Meaning and survival need not be separate. The oldest human mystery, therefore, cannot be solved by looking only inside the skull. The mind evolved in weather, hunger, darkness, migration, and loss. It was shaped by ice and drought as much as by neurons. The first symbolic worlds may have grown because humans needed more than tools to survive instability. They needed shared memory strong enough to outlast one body. They needed signs that could bind groups together. They needed stories that could carry warning, identity, and hope across generations. Climate did not create imagination by itself, but it may have sharpened the need for it. As landscapes changed around them, early humans learned to carry another landscape within a map of memory, meaning, and possibility that no drought could entirely erase. Where evidence grows thin, imagination rushes in. It has always done so. The oldest human mystery is too vast, too intimate, and too incomplete to remain untouched by speculation. A handprint on a cave wall becomes a message from a lost priesthood. A strange stone alignment becomes proof of a vanished global civilization. A carved figure becomes an astronaut. A gap in the record becomes a hidden catastrophe, a forgotten empire, an ancient technology suppressed by scholars, or a visitor from the stars. These stories can be entertaining, and sometimes they begin with genuine wonder, but wonder is not the same as evidence. The difficult task is to protect the mystery without turning it into fantasy. The real past does not need false decoration. It is already strange enough. Early humans crossed seas without maps that survived. They made pigment recipes before writing. They entered dangerous caves and painted animals in darkness. They buried some of their dead, carried shells across landscapes, mixed with other human species, survived climatic swings, and turned fragile bodies into vessels of memory. None of this requires aliens, secret master races, or a lost civilization teaching helpless hunter-gatherers how to think. The evidence remains incomplete, but incompleteness is not an invitation to invent whatever answer feels grandest. It is a call for patience. One of the most common false trails is the idea that complex behavior must have come from somewhere more advanced than the people who left the evidence. This assumption appears again and again in popular claims about prehistoric monuments, ancient art, early navigation, and symbolic objects. If a structure is too large, a journey too difficult, or an image too sophisticated, then some hidden teacher is imagined behind it. But this quietly underestimates ancient people. It treats them as incapable of observation, planning, cooperation, and accumulated skill. Archaeology shows the opposite. Human groups without cities or writing can possess deep environmental knowledge, strong memory systems, complex social rules, and extraordinary technical ability. Civilization is not the beginning of intelligence. Another false trail is the search for one dramatic key that explains everything: a volcanic eruption, a comet impact, a sudden mutation, a sacred plant, a lost island, a single migration, a single cave, a single symbolic object. Each is sometimes asked to carry the whole story of humanity's awakening. Real history rarely behaves so neatly. Climate mattered, but climate alone cannot explain symbolic culture. Brain evolution mattered, but brains alone do not make traditions durable. Language mattered, but language leaves no direct fossil. Population networks mattered, but they were shaped by geography, food, danger, and chance. No single explanation fully accounts for the evidence, because the evidence points toward a convergence of many pressures and capacities over long spans of time. The myth of a lost prehistoric supercivilization is especially seductive because it offers a ready-made answer to scattered mysteries. If ancient humans painted caves, crossed water, tracked stars, remembered floods, or built monuments, perhaps they inherited knowledge from a forgotten world destroyed by catastrophe. Such stories borrow the emotional shape of real events. Sea levels did rise. Coastlines were drowned. Local cultures surely disappeared under water, sand, forest, and ice. Entire landscapes of human life are gone, but there is a vast difference between recognizing submerged prehistoric coastlines and claiming an advanced global civilization without evidence. What survives in the record suggests many lost worlds of hunter-gatherers, fishers, foragers, and early communities, not a vanished industrial or technological empire hidden just beyond proof. Alien explanations are even less necessary. They often appear where people are unwilling to accept that ancient humans could create powerful images, move stones, map landscapes, or observe the sky with patience. But the slow accumulation of human skill explains far more than imagined intervention. A cave painter did not need a spacecraft to see the curve of a horse's body. A toolmaker did not need a visitor from another planet to understand stone fracture. A community did not need alien instruction to bury a child with care. Such theories do not deepen the mystery, they flatten it. They remove human hands from human achievements. There are also subtler myths, more respectable in tone but still misleading. One is the myth of the primitive mind, the belief that early humans lived only in immediate hunger and fear, unable to imagine, remember, or symbolize until some late breakthrough transformed them. This is not supported by the growing complexity of the evidence. Another is the myth of the fully modern mind appearing complete from the start, as if the first Homo sapiens already carried every form of later religion, art, and language in recognizable shape. That too goes beyond what can be shown. The truth lies between these extremes. Early humans were neither empty brutes nor modern philosophers wearing animal skins. They were people in formation, carrying capacities that emerged, changed, and endured unevenly. Even genuine discoveries can be distorted when pulled away from context. A decorated shell becomes the first jewelry in a headline, though the actual object may belong to a complicated debate about wear, transport, and dating. A possible burial becomes proof of religion, though burial can mean many things. A geometric mark becomes the first writing, though writing requires a system of signs tied to language, not just deliberate pattern. Scholars still debate many of these finds precisely because responsible interpretation must move slower than excitement. The past deserves better than certainty built on a single fragment. This does not mean mystery should be drained of life. Caution is not dullness. It is what allows the mystery to remain real. There is more awe in a carefully studied hand stencil than in a fabricated myth, because the hand stencil truly exists. Someone truly stood in darkness, pressed a palm to stone, and left absence shaped like a person. There is more wonder in a shell bead worn smooth by ancient contact than in a fantasy of lost masters, because the bead was really carried on a body that moved through a vanished world. Evidence, however small, has a gravity invention cannot match. The strongest stories are those that stay close to the ground. They admit uncertainty without surrendering to emptiness. They let a stone tool be a stone tool and still recognize the planning within it. They let ochre be practical and possibly symbolic without forcing it into one meaning. They let Neanderthals be complex without making them identical to us. They let caves remain sacred, social, artistic, or strange without pretending to translate every sign. What survives in the record suggests depth. It does not grant ownership of the dead. So the false trails must be left behind, not because the mystery is smaller than popular imagination, but because it is greater. The true story is not that ancient humans were helped by impossible outsiders or guided by a vanished master civilization. The true story is that fragile, mortal beings, living under cold stars and unstable climates, learned slowly to make worlds inside their minds. They did this with stone, fire, pigment, gesture, memory, grief, and language that vanished into breath. The real mystery is not too little. It is almost too much, and it belongs to them. After the false trails fall away, the mystery does not vanish. It becomes sharper. The real fragments remain on the table. Stubborn and incomplete stone tools older than clear art, pigments older than translation, burials older than certainty, signs older than writing, human bones older than the stories they may once have carried. Each clue brings the past close, and then stops just short of letting us enter. The oldest human mystery survives not because archaeologists have found nothing, but because they have found just enough to reveal the shape of a question that cannot yet be fully answered. The first contradiction is the long age of tools without obvious art. For immense spans of time, humans and human relatives make stone tools, carry them, refine them, teach their manufacture, and depend on them for survival. Some tools are so carefully shaped that they suggest planning, skill, and perhaps even a sense of form, yet unmistakable images, ornaments, and symbolic objects appear much later and unevenly. This does not mean early toolmakers lacked complex thought. It means their thoughts either did not take durable symbolic form, or those forms did not survive, or archaeologists have not yet found them. The evidence remains incomplete, and the silence is not easy to interpret. Then there is art without writing. The painted caves, engraved bones, carved figures, and repeated signs show that humans could create powerful visual worlds long before they developed writing systems. A horse on a cave wall can be recognized after tens of thousands of years. A hand stencil can still feel like contact, but recognition is not translation. The images survive without their grammar. We can see the animal, but not the story surrounding it. We can see the sign, but not the rule that made it meaningful. A row of dots may have mattered deeply to the people who made it, but to us it remains a locked mark. What survives in the record suggests communication, but not the message. Burials create another contradiction. A body placed carefully in the ground may suggest grief, memory, social attachment, or belief. Objects near the dead may suggest offerings, clothing, identity, or accident. Red pigment may suggest ritual, decoration, preservation, or transfer from something long vanished. The arrangement can be recorded in detail, but the intention remains partly hidden. No single explanation fully accounts for the variety of early death practices. Some groups buried. Some may have exposed bodies. Some may have used water, fire, platforms, caves, or landscapes in ways that left almost nothing. The graves that survive may not represent the whole world of prehistoric death, only the part that time allowed to remain. Even the human body itself creates a puzzle. Anatomically, modern humans appear before the archaeological record becomes rich in obvious symbols. This gap may be partly an illusion caused by preservation, population size, and the fragility of early culture, but it still matters. A skull that looks like ours does not automatically reveal a mind that thinks exactly like ours. At the same time, it would be wrong to imagine those people as mentally empty simply because their symbolic life is hard to see. The body brings us close enough to feel kinship, but not close enough to claim certainty. Bone keeps the outline. The inner life is gone. The shadow of other humans makes the problem even more difficult. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other extinct relatives were not background figures waiting for Homo sapiens to take the stage. They were human lineages with their own histories, adaptations, skills, and perhaps their own symbolic practices. Yet their records are uneven. Some evidence hints at pigment use, ornaments, body treatment, and possible cave markings. Other evidence remains disputed. If they shared parts of symbolic thought, then meaning was not the property of one species alone. If their symbolic lives were different from ours, then the human mind had more forms than one. Scholars still debate where to draw these lines, and every confident boundary seems to blur under closer study. The deepest contradiction may be that the most important things were the least likely to survive: language, song, gesture, dance, memory, dreams, rules, taboos, kinship systems, names, jokes, warnings, and stories probably carried much of early human life. Almost none of them fossilize. A group could live inside a dense symbolic universe and leave behind only ordinary stone debris. Another group could leave stunning cave paintings and still hide most of its meaning from us. Archaeology sees the durable edge of culture, not necessarily its center. The oldest human mystery may therefore be distorted by the materials that endured. This does not make the search hopeless. It makes it humbling. New methods continue to widen the visible record. Microscopic wear marks reveal how tools were used. Residues show pigments, adhesives, plant processing, and cooking. Ancient DNA reveals meetings between human lineages once invisible in bone. Sediment can preserve traces of people who left no skeleton. Improved dating can move a discovery deeper into time or remove it from a claim it once seemed to support. Each technique adds light, but not enough to erase the shadows completely. And perhaps the shadows are part of the truth. The first symbolic worlds were not built for archaeologists. They were built for the living, for the child learning where water lay after drought, for the hunter remembering animal movement, for the group marking belonging, for the mourner placing a body in earth, for the artist entering darkness with a torch. These acts were not meant to become evidence. They were meant to work inside their own moment. Time turned only a few of them into clues. So what remains refuses to become a single answer. Old tools show planning but not myth. Ochre shows transformation but not translation. Footprints show movement but not purpose. Burials show attention but not doctrine. Cave art shows vision but not explanation. Ancient DNA shows contact but not conversation. The fragments gather around the origin of meaning, but they do not close around it completely. They leave a space in the middle, and in that space stands the first human mind. Near enough to recognize, too distant to fully know. That is why the oldest human mystery still cannot be explained away. It is not one missing artifact waiting in a cave. It is the distance between evidence and experience. Archaeology can recover the handprint, but not the pulse in the wrist. It can recover the shell bead, but not the glance that recognized it. It can recover the grave, but not the grief that shaped the silence around it. The closer the fragments bring us, the more clearly we feel the final barrier. The dead left marks. They did not leave the key. The oldest human mystery does not end in the cave, the grave, the footprint, or the painted animal. It moves forward with the people who made them. The same need that once pressed a hand against stone later raises pillars, carves statues, builds tombs, names, rivers, maps stars, writes myths, and asks why the dead are gone. The first marks are small, but their legacy is enormous. Every monument, every prayer, every burial, every story of origins, every sign cut into clay or painted on a wall belongs to the long afterlife of that first human impulse to make the world mean more than it appears to mean. This is why the mystery is not remote, even though its evidence is ancient. It is not only about people who lived in animal skins under Ice Age skies. It is about the beginning of a pattern that still defines human life. Humans do not simply occupy landscapes. They turn them into homelands, hunting grounds, sacred places, borders, memories, and ruins. They do not simply lose the dead. They bury them, burn them, name them, mourn them, fear them, honor them, or carry them in stories. They do not simply see animals. They make them into food, danger, companions, symbols, spirits, constellations, emblems, and gods. Somewhere in prehistory, the world became layered, and human beings began living not only among things, but among meanings. The evidence remains incomplete, but the direction is unmistakable. Stone tools reveal planning, ochre reveals transformation, beads reveal social display, footprints reveal movement through remembered landscapes, burials reveal attention to the dead, caves reveal images made where darkness had to be entered deliberately. Ancient DNA reveals that humanity itself was never a single pure line, but a web of encounters, survivals, disappearances, and inheritances. Each fragment adds a layer, and together they suggest that becoming human was not a single event. It was a long accumulation of habits that turned survival into culture. The strange thing is that this process did not remove humans from nature. It made their relationship with nature deeper and more dangerous. A lion was still a lion. A drought was still a drought. A broken leg was still a threat to life. But now these things could also be remembered, explained, feared in advance, painted, ritualized, and taught. Meaning did not replace survival. It entered survival and changed it. A group with shared stories could cooperate across time. A group with ornaments could recognize allies and strangers. A group with burial customs could hold memory in place. A group with language could make yesterday useful and tomorrow imaginable. No single explanation fully accounts for this transformation because it was biological, social, environmental, and symbolic all at once. The mystery also became us through loss. Most early human worlds disappeared completely. Their songs are gone. Their names are gone. Their rules, jokes, fears, lullabies, and warnings are gone. Even their gods, if they had gods, are beyond recovery. Archaeology finds only the hardest remains of soft lives. Yet those remains are enough to reveal that the first human minds were not empty spaces waiting for civilization. They were already working with memory, material, danger, identity, and absence. They were already reaching beyond the immediate. They were already doing the thing humans still do when they stand before a grave: look at the stars, or leave a mark for someone else to find. There is a quiet irony in the search itself. Modern archaeology is another form of meaning-making. A bone is lifted from sediment, measured, dated, compared, and placed into a story. A pigment stain becomes evidence. A stone flake becomes intention. A cave wall becomes a question. The scientists who study these things work carefully, testing claims and resisting fantasy. But they too are part of the human habit of turning fragments into memory. The difference is discipline. The past must not be forced to say what it cannot say, but it must also not be treated as mute when it clearly carries traces of choice. What survives in the record suggests that the oldest human mystery is not simply when art began, when religion began, when language began, or when burial began. These are separate doors into a larger chamber. The deeper question is when humans began to live inside a world of invisible connections between object and identity, place and memory, body and belonging, death and continuation, image and unseen meaning. That world has no single fossil. It appears wherever ordinary matter becomes charged with significance. A shell becomes more than shell. A cave becomes more than shelter. A body becomes more than remains. A mark becomes more than scratch. And because that mystery became us, it cannot be solved from the outside as if it belonged to a vanished species unrelated to our own lives. The same mind that studies the first handprint still understands the desire to leave one. The same species that wonders why a child was buried with beads still places objects with the dead. The same creature that once carried ochre now carries flags, rings, photographs, names, and books. The forms have changed beyond recognition, but the impulse remains strangely continuous. Humans are animals that make symbols, and then live inside them. Still, humility must remain at the centre. The first meaning cannot be recovered as a scene with clear faces and spoken words. There is no final inscription hidden under the oldest hearth, no perfect cave waiting to explain all caves, no grave that will translate death for every ancient people. Scholars still debate the evidence because the evidence deserves debate. The fragments are too precious to be flattened into certainty. The oldest human mystery remains alive because it stands at the edge of what can be known. Yet not knowing is not failure. It is part of the encounter. The distance between the present and the deep past allows the first humans to remain themselves, not merely characters in a modern story. They do not owe us easy answers. They left what they left: stone, pigment, bone, ash, shells, tracks, images, and silence. From these, we learn that they were makers of tools, travellers across changing worlds, watchers of animals, keepers of memory, mourners of the dead, and creators of signs whose meanings are mostly gone. That is enough to bring them close. It is not enough to possess them. So the mystery that archaeologists still cannot fully explain may be the oldest mystery because it is the beginning of explanation itself. Before writing, before kings, before temples, before cities, humans began asking the world to hold meaning. They pressed colour into darkness, shaped stone with intention, carried ornaments across landscapes, and placed bodies into earth. They made traces, and the traces waited. Long afterward, we find them and feel the ancient door still partly closed. On one side are the first minds making meaning. On the other side are our own, still trying to understand why. Word count 1112. The story quiets here, but it does not close completely. It settles back into the landscapes where it began: dry lake beds, cold caves, drowned coasts, open plains, shelters blackened by old fires, and graves whose names were lost before writing ever began. The people who moved through those places are gone, yet they are not entirely absent. They remain in the curve of a tool, in the red dust caught in stone, in the hollow where a body once lay, in a handprint that is both presence and disappearance. Time has taken almost everything from them. It has taken their voices, their faces, their songs, their fears, their small daily tendernesses. It has taken the stories told to children and the names whispered over the dead. It has taken the meanings of signs that once may have been obvious to everyone who entered a cave by firelight. But time did not take all. Enough remains to show that the first human world was not silent, not empty, not simple. It was alive with attention. And perhaps that is the calmest answer the evidence allows. Human beings became human not in one sudden moment, but through countless acts of attention. Attention to stone, to weather, to animals, to one another, to children, to the dead, to memory, to places worth returning to, and to marks worth leaving behind. Out of that attention came tools, symbols, stories, rituals, and eventually civilizations that would rise and vanish in their own turn. The mystery remains because the beginning of meaning cannot be held like a finished object. It can only be approached, slowly, through fragments. And as the night settles over the ancient ground, it is possible to imagine one last image: a person standing in darkness, flame trembling in one hand, pigment on the other, facing a wall of stone. The world outside is cold and dangerous. The future is unimaginable. Yet the hand rises anyway. A mark is made. For a moment, the darkness holds it. Then the person steps away, and time begins its long work,